I'm here to talk today a little bit about what happened a couple years ago when we came to our first UIA meeting. So the first UIA gathering 1.0 was here in Atlanta in February 2015 at Georgia State University, thanks to our great hosts. And the photograph you see was actually one I tweeted out from the auditorium. We were there as a team from Michigan State University, and we saw this team of folks. They're being moderated by Jeff Salingo, and they were from different offices at Georgia State, and they talked about how they came to understand the student experience at Georgia State as being one that was much more complicated than they understood. Now, each of these people, and many of them are here in the room today. If you're in that picture, raise your hand. There's 10, yeah, okay. So they're here, and you can talk to them later. These are all very empathetic people. But what we've learned when we start doing student success work is that empathy in an individual office or individual person isn't enough. We need to scale it up. And here's one way of thinking about how to scale it up. So we looked at, this slide comes from our friends at the EAB, and this is when they did a process mapping exercise with community college administrators. And community college administrators, kind of like our friends at Georgia State, when they first thought about moving a student from admission or application to financial aid to matriculation to enrollment, many of us think this works kind of linearly because we sit in one of these boxes and students come to us from the box before and we think we send them to the box after. But when you actually start talking about student experience, it is a spaghetti pile of sometimes unending feedback loops that they can't get out of. So the idea that we could look with more empathy at what our students' experience is sort of what led us to take up the Georgia State process. So the Michigan State team, so Michigan, you may know, is sometimes a little snowy. We were in the middle of a polar vortex. So while we waited for our plane at gate A19 in the Atlanta airport, every time I go by, I think fondly of this, we thought, what's a problem at Michigan State that might benefit from this kind of activity? And we said, we've been complaining for years about the numbers of emails we send to students and they never reply, and we don't know if they listen to our emails or read them, I guess. We just think they go into this giant black hole. So what if we looked at communication from Michigan State University to students from the time they submit their deposit, so they've said, I'm coming, I'm a Spartan, through the end of their first year. And then with a particular empathetic look at how might our low-income, first-generation, Black, Latinx, and Native American students experience these communications. So that was the process we decided to look at. So we get on our plane eventually, we make our way back to Michigan. We sent our UIA fellow to training in process mapping. And a couple months later, we brought ourselves back together. Now that's Dr. Terry Frazier from our Vice President of Student Affairs office. He's a handsome fellow, but look behind him on the wall and you'll get a sense of what was happening that day. This is not even a complete list of everybody who was in the room, but we brought folks from across campus, admissions, financial aid, academic colleges, advisors, faculty. We had a physicist in the room, the comptroller, registrar, together to talk about what are the ways that we communicate with students from the time they're admitted until the end of their first year, or time they've committed to us. And so you see in the background behind Dr. Frazier, sticky notes. There's a theme in the UIA, which is that we think we should get 3M to support us because we do buy a lot of sticky notes collectively. And when we asked this set of people to come together over 2 days, this is one of the 2 charts we developed. So each sticky note represents a communication sent by that office. And when we put them all together in a calendar, and you can see the sort of swim lanes, different colors, we learned that we were sending students literally hundreds of emails. The count was between 400 and 500, sending them to dozens of portals, none of which use the same access, or probably even the same, what do we call them? Passwords, yes. We also had dozens of ways that along the way students could get a hold put on their accounts, so they couldn't register or they'd have to leave school. And then we acted. We created a key functions team to prioritize and create some alternatives to email. Now, this looks alarming, but it's better than this. So this was the chart that came out of that prioritization exercise. On the top half are the communications sent to students between deposit and the time they get to campus, and the bottom line shows what's happening on campus. There are not between 400 and 500 emails on that list. One of the things we learned is that a lot of those emails we were sending to students had PDFs attached, and that's because back when we thought that was a good way to save paper, we stopped giving all those papers to students at orientation. We made them all into PDFs, and we all sent them out. So some poor student is getting finish your financial aid, sign up for your residence hall, and 3-on-3 volleyball sign up is today. All in the same day, not knowing which one to read. No wonder they were missing important messages from us. So we also had several collateral outcomes that came from this process. One is that a group of folks in the room over lunch, I think, said, there should be one place students could go to look for scholarships. We had not had that thing. We had a group say, we need to start looking at the kinds of holds students get. Out of that came a little nano grant trial. We looked one summer at students who owed the university $100 or less and were therefore not going to be able to re-enroll for fall. And most of the time, these were like a parking ticket and then a fine on top of that. So it really cost us literally nothing in many cases to get some of those students back. There was a lot of community building across silos, people who hadn't known each other but sort of knew what offices were. So for me, it was easier to be able to call Jennifer or Keith in financial aid than just send a student over to financial aid and hope things turned out okay. There was also shared commitment to student success. Before that meeting at Michigan State, we hadn't widely used the language of student success, but it began to give us a common vocabulary for that. And then there was capacity building among professionals and faculty. People went back to their own offices and said, what are the things here within our own office we might think about the same process with? So those are some of our collateral outcomes. Now, being the UIA, we then came back to a UIA meeting and we talked about what we'd done. And different UIA campuses said, we want to do it too. Send their fellows up to East Lansing all kinds of times of year, snow, ice, heat, humidity. And several UIA campuses have looked at things like medical withdrawals, removing enrollment holds, financial aid, community college transfer. What does that process look like? How do students declare and enter majors? So as they begin to map these out, and here's the 3M sticky note theme, you begin to see different ways of visualizing the student pathways through different processes at our campuses. And thinking with that lens of empathy, what is this like for a student whose parents don't speak English? What is this like for a student who is transferring from another university system? What is this like for our minoritized students or low-income students? So these are a couple more examples from other campuses. There's a session tomorrow where you're going to have the chance to talk more about process mapping on your own campus. So in addition to talking a bit about this concept of process mapping, and thanks again to our Georgia State colleagues, this is for me an example of diffusion of process, which is the UIA way, or as one of my colleagues at Michigan State calls it, UIA-ismo. So UIA-ismo, or ISM, would involve, we saw what our colleagues at Georgia State were doing, we got ourselves together for a couple days in East Lansing, we're benefiting our own students there in those happy Spartan green graduation gowns, but also coming back and sharing those messages with the University of Aviation Alliance for folks to go out and spread the news themselves. So innovating, scaling, and diffusing. That is the UIA way. Thank you so much.